Oh, hey everyone. Welcome to another episode of Solidity Fridays. Today I am joined with Tamara and Flora from the Linen team. And yeah, we'll be going through OpenZeppelin's top hacking techniques of 2022. It's a report that includes the top 10 hacks. So yeah, Tam, I think over to you. I'm just gonna show your screen recording. Is it ready?
Yeah.
Cool. Perfect. Let me put that in there. Right.
Cool. So I'm sure all our viewers will know who OpenZeppelin are, but if not, they're the OG security researchers in the blockchain space. Huge respect for them, and they do a lot of audits. So these reports that they started releasing on blockchain hacking techniques are a really good resource. And we thought we could break down the report because it's quite a high-level paragraph on each of the hacking techniques. That we thought we could go more in depth and actually look at the audit reports. And I thought Flora would be perfect for this because Flora has a keen interest in security and is a really good auditor herself. So yeah, thanks for joining, Flora. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks, Tam. I'm good. And you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Excited for this episode. Cool. So yeah, just a note. In 2022 alone, there was $3.7 billion lost in exploits and hacking in blockchains technology, which is a huge number. Wow, that's quite upsetting. So OpenZeppelin documented the top security research from 2022 to promote best practices and effective security measures across the industry. This is crucial as blockchain technology becomes more widely adopted and impacts more aspects of daily life. There is a necessity to support developers and communities through safer Web3 experiences. Absolutely. So the community nominated and then voted on the security research to be considered, and then after which a team of really great experts voted on these nominations to select and rank the final 10. And then yeah, they did a little write-up, and we're going to go more in depth and look at the actual reports by various auditing firms that found these vulnerabilities. I do think this might be a multi-part series.
Definitely.
Yeah, which is exciting.
Yeah, we can go into everything.
So yeah, firstly, I always struggle to say this, but Samkism, I think, is how I would say that. Rebecca, how would you say it? Oh,
Samson?
Oh, could be.
Yeah, just for Samson.
Samson?
Oh, yeah, Samson. Head of security at Paradigm, been following his work for ages. Is this a link? No, unfortunately not.
Yeah, he's everywhere in the security space.
Yeah.
Most big exploits that are found, or vulnerabilities that are found before exploited, usually found by this incredible security researcher. Then we have Nikesh Nazareth, a security researcher at OpenZeppelin. I really like the work by Tincho on Ethereum security researcher and creator of Dan Vulnerable DeFi, which you can actually see is one of my bookmarks. I'm a huge fan.
Oh, wow.
So very excited to see there on the panel as well. CTS, co-founder of Zelic and Perfect Blue. I don't know too much about them, so after this, I'm actually going to do a bit of a deep dive into their career. Ashik Amin, also very impressive. And then Owning ETH is another independent security researcher with quite a good reputation. Cool. So there's a theme and a takeaway for each year hacking technique when they do this report. So there's last year's theme was around the discovery of bugs at the level of pre-compile, node, or key generation. And there's a couple of new bug classes which we've never seen before, which is both scary and exciting, and something very, very important to take note of if you're interested in making smart contracts, because you have to stay on top of these bugs. Cool. So without further ado, let's get started. We're going to look at the top 10 hacking techniques, going from 10 to 1 across episodes. The this one is the compound TUSD integration issue retrospective, which is a double entry point issue, and it was described in this compound report. So if you don't know what compound is, hopefully you do. It's compound finance. They're huge. So yeah, they've got, I can't believe how big of a number that is. So
800
yeah,
million, 800 million
of borrowing backed
borrowing.
by 2 billion and more of
Jeez.
collateral across only 4 markets.
Wow.
And yeah, so they have the treasury. So yeah, you can earn and manage, and they've got amazing pools. And yeah, they've been they were audited by OpenZeppelin, Trail of Bits, Satora, and
Yeah, they're like the OG in the space, and I remember their GitHub repo is like the second most forked in the DeFi space, just after OpenZeppelin.
it
No,
is,
just
you're right.
after Uniswap V2. Yeah.
Okay, yes. That's very interesting. Fun fact. Yeah, and they have very interesting code on, I think their V3's out now. And yeah, Flora's been looking into it as a personal project, and has found some interesting stuff. So yeah, that's Compound. Compound 2 and Compound 3 are still available. Worth checking out. But yes, so they were audited by, if I'm not mistaken, OpenZeppelin themselves and Chain Security. And there was they found a vulnerability that wasn't just isolated to Compound themselves. It's actually a broad vulnerability that people must take note of. So the bug arose from having 2 contracts controlling the same assets, which enabled the bypassing of a safety check and allowed for the sweeping of all TUSD from the Compound protocol, which in turn made it possible to mint fresh Compound TUSD at a discount. Wow, that's a big one. So there was a cooperation of multiple parties, which allowed for the protection of other protocols beyond the original bug identified in the integration of the TUSD and Compound, which underscores the importance of thorough testing and diligent bug hunting to ensure the security and stability of blockchain protocols. So there's a quote here by Samson, let's say. The only thing worse than a bug in your code that breaks everything is a bug in your code that subtly breaks one thing. Cool. So let's actually look at this bug. So this is the retrospective. It was written by OpenZeppelin, but I was wrong. It was actually Chain Security found the bug. And just a quick visit to their website. Chain Security are, I honestly think, my favorite in the space. The ones I have the biggest respect for. I mean, look at this. This is a very impressive portfolio. And so it says here, as many as 30 DeFi protocols may have been similarly affected.
Can we look at the code? Like, is there
There's a
link
patch
there?
here. So I can't see the old broken code. That might be further down in the retrospective, but this patch is here. This is the transaction of the patch. So I assume
What would this be?
Is Compound upgradable, Flora?
Yeah, I think of course they're upgradable. That's why they have from V1 to V3.
I see. So,
but I read from the retrospective, like they didn't just update the Compound code, but they fix the root problem, which is the TUSD code.
that's
so basically it's like, as long as I remember, like the TUSD and the Compound USD was calculated by but was affected because there was a function in their code which is like sweep token, and when anyone can call that function to rescue the token that is not intended to be in the contract. So basically, like in the compound contract, when you send token there, and because the contract cannot execute itself, so if someone sends tokens there needs to be a way to just like send back token for them in case it's not their intent. So there is script function to call to rescue that token, and there's a check that that token is not the underlying asset, which is in this case the TUSD. But in our case, the TUSD was upgradable, so it has a proxy contract and an implementation contract. So, for example, if someone send the if someone call that function and there are so many TUSDs in the contract, and it will just swipe all the TUSD tokens from that contract, but it's like it bypass the jack because it used two addresses. Like one address is like the proxy address, and one address is implementation address.
Okay, wow.
So
sure.
yeah, so basically like the contract will hold no TUSD anymore because yes, and it will affect the ratio between TUSD and compound USD.
Wow, okay.
TCUSD or CTUSD, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, CTUSD. It gets confusing, these names.
Yeah.
I see. So that's why you could also mint more CTUSD at a discount.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. So let's maybe go into this retrospective a bit. So compound finance is one of the most widely used protocols in the DeFi ecosystem. It issues automatic permissionless loans of Ether and various ERC20 tokens. And it had more than 10 billion in assets across 18 markets in February 2022. I think this happened around the end of February 2022.
Oh, sure.
To invest in Compound, users deposit Ether or supported ERC20 tokens into one of the protocol's markets. So we saw there's 4 main markets now. In exchange, they receive C tokens for that market. So that's the Compound version of that token, with which they can redeem their investment. Compound C tokens are differentiated and denominated according to the underlying assets. For example, investors who deposit Ether retrieve CETH tokens, which are redeemable for ETH. Same for other tokens. The total value of each market increases as funds are lent out and repaid. As the value held in a market grows, the C tokens for that market increase in value and can be redeemed for more of the underlying assets. In this way, investors accrue interest. When the protocol operates as intended, the value of a C token relative to its underlying asset should only increase, which is very interesting. So here's some on governance. I don't know if we need to go into their governance, to be honest. So here, Flora is telling us about TrueUSD. It's stable coin originally developed by Trust Token. It is tradable for assets and redeemable for fiat currency. It has a low volatility, which is great in the crypto space, and can be used to hedge against market instability. All TUSD in circulation is collateralized on a one-to-one basis by US dollars held in escrow by banks, and the reserves undergo continuous attestations by a third party. That would be interesting to read how that's done. As of February 2022, 1.5 billion worth of TUSD was in circulation. At that time, approximately 88 million was invested in Compound, making Compound's TUSD market its 8th largest. And so, yeah, as we said, you put TUSD into Compound and you receive CTUSD tokens, and then later you can redeem. Yeah, now we get to the vulnerability. Chain Security discovered a critical vulnerability in the Compound TUSD integration during a security audit of the Compound C token smart contracts conducted prior to OpenZeppelin's security partnership with Compound. Cool. So it affected the amount of TUSD redeemable by Compound's investors. And cool. So it's called a double entry point. So as Flora outlined, because you have your proxy and your implementation in this upgradable pattern that they chose, you have 2 contracts calling one underlying asset. So that's the double entry point that they're going to outline. So it's important, or it's helpful to have a layman's understanding of three concepts that made it possible for the vulnerability to occur. The difficulty of upgrading smart contracts, it's very tough, the way in which Web3 developers deal with stray tokens, and thirdly, the process by which markets are established on Compound. First, consider the difficulty of upgrading smart contracts. Unless potential upgrades are contemplated well in advance, Web3 contracts are immutable, so once deployed, it can't be modified. This is a feature, not a bug, and it allows users to use them without having to trust third parties. However, it means it's also difficult to fix bugs or add functionality. So our modern implementations of upgradability rely on the deployment of two contracts. A first contract, which is your proxy, and then the second, which contains the logic. This logic contract is called your implementation contract. Users interact with the proxy contract, which wraps the logic contract, so AI forwards directions to it using a delegate call. Both contracts remain immutable, but the logic contract can be replaced with another one. Trust Token's original deployment of TUSD predated this proxy-based approach, anticipating upgrades in a different way. It had been built as a system that forwarded calls to specific functions to a new contract, then as yet undeployed. This would allow the TUSD team to deploy such a contract in the future if it needed to make changes. When the need for changes eventually arose, Trust Token deployed a second TUSD contract. This new contract was upgradable. Cool. And Flores mentioned that it was upgradable. So yeah, nothing changed from a user perspective. Now we went on to that second point, how Web3 developers deal with what we call stray tokens. So in the Web3 environment, it is possible for a wallet to send tokens to any smart contract, even if doing so has no purpose in keeping with the intended use of the smart contract. So tokens can get stuck. To address this problem, many smart contracts contain a function that sweeps stray tokens into a wallet so that an administrator can return them. All C-token smart contracts contain such a sweep token function, which is configured to sweep stray tokens into the compound time lock described above. It is important to note that the function includes a check to ensure that the token address parameter to be swept is not the same as the underlying asset. That would burn the token. Third, consider the process of establishing a market and Compound. The basis of each of Compound's markets is an implementation of the C-token contract. The C-token contract is a configurable smart contract template designed to integrate with other ERC20 contracts with the Compound protocol. Once configured for the underlying asset and deployed, a C-token contract constitutes a market. It accepts investments of the underlying assets and supplies depositors with corresponding C-tokens. And this has been well audited. So now we go to the two contract double entry vulnerability points, which Flora outlined for us. So it was already in place at the time in the Compound TUSD market was inaugurated. As the C-token contract template can only hold one underlying token, the TUSD team configured the template to interact with the newer TUSD contract implementation. Unfortunately, this created a double entry point through which two different token addresses, which allowed an attacker to sweep all TUSD tokens in the CTUSD contract into the time lock, not just the stray tokens. Wow. So anyone calling sweep token, which we saw was in Compound, in which you pass an EIP, so you pass a token that's not a EIP or ERC20 standard interface. It's an external function, and so all it does is just checks you're not burning the token, and then transfers. And then it just transfers it to the admin. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we see this is an externally owned account or user with not a smart contract, and then you call sweep token to CTUSD, and then this is, I think, the proxy calling to the current implementation contract, and then so this transfer doesn't revert and sweeps the tokens, but this would revert, but you can go around that because you go via this contract. Wow, hectic.
Yeah, Like
Cool.
it was intended to be reversed if it's TUSD, but turned out TUSD has two addresses that implement the same function, the proxy contract and implementation contract. So the contract holds no TUSD, but but it shouldn't just it's not intended to do so. Like if it holds no TUSD, then the ratio between TUSD and CTUSD will drop, and which in turn we can mint a lot of CTUSD for a relatively small amount of TUSD.
Wow. And it's also interesting because both of these were all of this separately was audited. And so they make a point here saying the novelty of this behavior highlights the depth of insights of the chain security auditors who discovered it. So yeah, as Flora just said, it has implications for the redemption of TUSD deposited with Compound. Yeah. And if all of the market's underlying tokens are swept, the interest rate on positions open before the exploit decreases and has a potential to drop below zero. To take advantage of this phenomenon, an attacker would call the function described above and then deposit a large amount of TUSD. The attacker, along with any other suppliers, would get a massive discount on the newly opened positions at the expense of the previous depositors. Then it would be possible to return the swept tokens to the CTUSD contract, but deposits made before that would cause irreparable damage. So yeah, remember there was 88 million worth of TUSD, of which roughly half was redeemable and roughly half had been lent out. If exploited to the greatest extent possible, this vulnerability would have approximately halved the value of any redemptions made using CTUSD tokens issued prior to the exploit. Wow. Cool. So it was like a chain security outlined a mitigation strategy, and then OpenZeppelin took that idea and came up with another idea. So the prior plan was to roll the fix into an ongoing C token refactoring project being conducted by Equilibria under a compound ground. This silent fix approach was intended to remedy the problem while calling the minimum amount of attention to it. But then OpenZeppelin elected to investigate the matter further before making its own recommendation. On February 4th, the TUSD team initiated Proposal 84, which would have made updates to the TUSD market. But yeah, that wasn't a good idea. And then OpenZeppelin privately reached out to both the TUSD and Trust token teams to alert them to the existence of a vulnerability. At the time, it appeared that the vulnerability was compound specific. So in consultation with the compound multi-sig users, so that governance that we skipped over, OpenZeppelin opted not to disclose any details before the issue was remedied. Okay, and then I just want to see. Yeah, then they realized variants of the same vulnerability existed in other DeFi protocols, up to 30. Wow, that's a huge number. Cool. So now this is the approach that they had. These are the two approaches they envisioned. They could have the pause guardian of Compound halt the TUSD market and initiate a proposal that would protect Compound from an exploit. But this would have signaled the existence of a serious vulnerability to all users. This approach would have protected Compound from permanent damage, as an attacker who swept the TUSD contract's tokens would have then been unable to then mint new CTUSD tokens. But it also would have fired the starting gun in a race between other protocols and would-be attackers to find the vulnerability, so not the best option. Or the one they went for is contact the TUSD team and ask them to patch the vulnerability at its source. A direct solution, and then it also helps the other 30 DeFi protocols. which also limited public exposure of the vulnerability to near zero in both degree and duration. But that required full disclosure of the vulnerability to trust token and TUSD teams. Cool. So they went for option 2, but retained option 1 as a fallback position. So that's quite a good idea to have several mitigation strategies and then say, we're going to do this one. These are backup plans.
And I think it's quite mind-blowing that, and it was quite fortunate that other protocols there was no exploit before, because like that was an existing exploit, and
yes,
with like 30 other protocols, but no one found it. Like imagine if they found it and just didn't exploit to all 30 protocol. I think the crypto space, it would like, it would be like huge scandal.
Yes, and possibly billions of dollars lost. Yeah, so they met with the Compound Multisig signers, their governance team, and they contacted Trust Token and TSD teams. And yeah, they patched it. But it's interesting to maybe to look at this lessons learned section. So these are the lessons they learned. Firstly, it is essential to exercise due care in integrating a new non-native token into a protocol. Absolutely. The fact that the smart contracts for a protocol and a non-native token had both been audited does not necessarily mean that the integration between the two is secure. The integration itself constitutes an important part of the attack surface. Secondly, it highlights the importance of collegiality and respectful collaboration among Web3 professionals, which, I mean, Flora just said, like, all these teams had to work together and to save like 30 protocols. And if just chain security had kept it to themselves, so if OpenZeppelin hadn't stepped in or TUSD had said, no, we don't want to hear, then this wouldn't have happened. So collaborating is really important in the space. And finally, they wish us to convey the respect to chain security. The vulnerability was in code that was not part of OpenZeppelin's originally intended audit scope. And if chain security had not found it, it wouldn't have been patched. So that's a very interesting double entry exploit that could happen. And luckily, it never did. And that's number 10 on the blockchain hacking techniques. Which, hopefully now none of us make that mistake when doing a proxy contract with an underlying asset. We'll be quite careful to see if a sweep could be done between the proxy and the implementation. Cool. Number 9 has to do with StarkNet. It's the StarkNet DAI bridge smart contracts. And there was a code assessment of the DAI bridge smart contracts audit. And this is a Cairo smart contract issue, which we haven't really done much smart contract Cairo stuff.
But I know that you did like Cairo bootcamp before, right? So how was the process? How was it?
Yes, I did the Spark.io Cairo bootcamp, and it was really, really helpful. Quite intense. It's a weird language, and it's a bit lower level than Solidity, but it's really fun and really interesting. It says here as a relatively low level language, Cairo has several potential pitfalls. And this issue is a prime example of one such problem. They also have different types, and they have a base type called felt, which contains 252 bits. Which is very different to Solidity's 256 bits for UN type. So as a result, Cairo provides an abstraction for UN 256, which requires additional safety checks to be performed, and it's easy to forget to do so. So that's because you're casting now. So that abstraction can lead to extra exploits. They say you can just use a higher level API in Cairo or apply static analysis tools to code base. So I would opt for the second option, just because I don't know. I don't love doing higher levels, transpiling down to lower levels too much. But with a language that has intricacies like Cairo and that is also so low level, you do need static analysis tools. There's a write-up on it. to do with MakerDAO. But it's very this is there was a blog post and a very technical audit report, and I opted for the latter, but we don't have to do the whole thing. Cool. So yeah, this is for MakerDAO, Maker, and it was also by Chain Security. Yeah, so they corrected everything, and yeah. So that's also quite interesting. Often a auditor's initial version, immediate report, and you patch, and then there's a final version. But then they did an updated version and another final version. So,
so the many rows.
Yeah, many like phases. Cool. The set of Solidity and Cairo contracts, because you can talk to each other between Solidity and Cairo. Implements a bridge for DAI from Ethereum layer 1, so the mainnet, to the Starknet layer 2 solution and vice versa. And it follows the concept of other similar DAI bridges from L1 to L2 solutions. So on that mainnet, on Ethereum mainnet, we had the DAI bridge, the escrow contract, and the governance relay. And then on the Starknet L2, we had DAI itself, the Starknet version of DAI, the L2 DAI bridge, and the L2 governance relay. Cool. So layer 2 DAI, it's similar to an ERC20 token. So default ERC20 functionality, transfer from, and all that. But since events do not exist on Starknet with Cairo, the token contract does not emit any of the default ERC20 events. Additionally, the DAI contract implements Mint, which is used by the token bridge to mint tokens after a deposit from L1. The burn function, which can be used by anyone to burn his tokens, is used by the bridge contract during the withdrawal of DAI from L2 back to L1. That makes sense. It's just like a normal bridge that. And in order to mitigate the approval problem of the default ERC20 approve function, the contract implements increase allowance and decrease allowance. And finally, a magic number used as the amount during approval works as truly unlimited approval for callers with this magic number as approved amount. The approved amount is not reduced. So also on Starknet, transactions sent to the network do not have a defined sender. External parties sending transactions to the network cannot be identified by an address. Hence, in order to hold tokens on Starknet, each user must deploy a contract which has a unique address. Such an address can then be used in the token contract to hold a balance or a privileged role. Then this is about the bridge itself. And yeah, I think this is actually such a great one to talk about because we are more and more we're using L2s, and these bridge intricacies can happen with any L2. So this kind of bridge architecture is similar for any L1, L2 token bridge. And so the mainnet contract implements all logic to deposit and withdraw DAI to and from L2. Deposited DAI are held by the L1 escrow contract, and then the layer 1 DAI bridge logic contract can be replaced independently of the escrow holding the DAI. So it's another way we are implementing upgradability in smart contracts. Then the L2 DAI bridge does the same thing, and we've explained how you can mint and burn DAI, and you don't need an escrow on the L2. Also, the bridge on L2 can be upgraded through a governance spell through the L2 governance relay contract that could remove the bridge's minting and burning rights and assign them to a new bridge.
So it's like upgradable,
Yeah, which is great. The bridge may be paused independently on L1 and L2, and once the bridge is paused, it cannot be unpaused. So that's when then you'll have the governance relay votes and make a new like L1 DAI bridge or L2 DAI bridge contract and use that instead, and then the escrow just sends the funds there. Cool. I don't know if we need to go more into detail.
We can just like look at the book that mentioned in OpenZeppelin quickly.
Yes. So let's go back here. Wait. There was a nice. Well, actually, sorry. Let's see. Findings, resolved findings. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have gone to the. I think it's this one though. This high.
Yeah, L2 die allows stealing.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's look at this in the report. So yeah, we were speaking about that transfer function of the L2 die contract, and you can steal tokens from other users. And the attack works as follows. Within the amount field of transfer of the transfer function, the user specifies an invalid UN256 because UN256 check is never called. To steal I token way, the attacker specifies P minus I to be amount dot low, and then 0 to be amount dot high. And the low amount could be interpreted as the negative number minus I. So then the UN256 Lee amount sender balance check will be passed, as it will ultimately compute the following: 1 minus is NN dot, in amount low minus sender balance low plus 1.
Sorry, but in general, what is amount dot low and amount dot high?
So instead of just having an amount, you can have a range, and it's almost like a slippage. It's for counting for slippage, I believe. Yeah. So then we go UN256 subtract sender balance amount. So now that's kind of the start of our transfers. We're reducing the balance from sender. But because we have a negative I as your low amount, it will result in an increased sender balance due to the specifically a crafted amount. And then when you add to the recipient balance, you can decrease the recipient balance due to that amount because now it's a negative low amount. So, wow, that's very interesting. They didn't teach that in my Cairo bootcamp.
Is that like overflowing and underflowing in Solidity?
It's like overflow and underflow. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it for it. So yeah, the decrease of the recipient balance also increases the sender balance, and the sender gains as many tokens as the recipient loses. And you can steal all the tokens of the receiver. Wow. So to correct it, amount is now validated in the internal function transfer. Thus, neither transfer nor transfer from can perform computations with invalid integers. Ultimately, the UN256 library functions receive the expected inputs and thus perform the documented computations. Wow, yeah, that's very interesting. There was we can close this now on this. There was a very high level explanation of it. I think this is it. Just an explanation. And if we just go to, it's just a short summary. Okay, this is just saying. Yeah, okay. So yeah, that's an interesting layer 2 specific thing that isn't even Solidity, but it's important to know because you can, obviously your die on mainnet is held in the escrow, and then if you send it to, well, you mint a corresponding amount on L2 and then steal that, you're actually in a way siphoning from mainnet. So I'm really glad they bought this one. So yeah, that's number 9. Cool. This one is huge as well. 350 million risk report for Avalanche. So again, a bit of a different chain, but this is Solidity. Avalanche is Solidity. This one was done by StateMind. and it revealed a clever exploit of seemingly innocuous behavior in the precompile, which allowed for the sending of native assets and an optional call to the receiver. This exploit was used to break the security assumptions of Abracadabra and Sushi contracts on multiple chains.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
they even audited the precompile to the precompile level.
Yeah, wow,
That's cool.
That's very cool. That's very interesting. So a note that they say is, even though the title of the disclosure points to Avalanche, the bug also affected the Moonbeam and Moon River chains, and an estimated total of $350 million was at risk. And with its ease of exploit to bypass blacklist protections, it was one of the most deadly bugs disclosed during 2022. Wow. So let's check it out maybe. This is the technical overview, and this is just the blog post. So maybe we just look at the blog post first. Okay, cool. So just an explanation maybe for like Rebecca is Solidity is a compiled language, so it doesn't just run like a scripting language. Before you deploy it, you do something called compilation, which takes your Solidity code and like almost like transpiles but compiles it into bytecode that the machines can understand at that low level.
Okay.
And so this is a pre-compiled contract vulnerability, which means it's in that compilation. It's just before that compilation step. So it's very like lower level, like hard to catch bug. That's why Flora and I are like so excited that they caught it. So yeah, Avalanche has several chains, I think 3, and the C chains is like their computation chain. So it was discovered within the Avalanche C chain native asset call precompile. So yeah, they don't use an EVM in the C chain. They use something EVM similar, but not an Ethereum virtual machine. They use like an Avalanche virtual machine. So this is an issue with inside the Avalanche like core logic for running any contract. It connected. So this was a unique feature on the connected to Avalanche native tokens, and yeah, you can target users. Sorry, you can call targets using blacklisted protected calls. So yeah, it's a bit silly because you kind of blacklist then. In a standard setting, the native asset call transfers the Avalanche native token from the caller to the callee. Yeah, it instills the pre-compiled contract with call data, which is just extra information that we put in the parameter of the function, such as the receiver address, asset ID, amount of the transfer, and more information if you want. What they discovered was a case where contracts allowed users to provide a callback address and failed to filter out the pre-compile from the blacklist. The vulnerability was the result of ineffective validation checks and was discovered in often overlooked pre-compiled contracts used to save time and money. Despite the rather mundane-sounding call, due to the complexity of the issue and the value at stake, the importance of the discovery could not be understated. Yeah, so then they made an anonymous tip to Unify, our bug bounty guards in the blockchain space. And yeah, SushiSwap core dev Matthew Lilly was the first to vocalize the discovery of an attack vector publicly. Ava Labs launched a patch as well. And yeah, so huge amounts at stake. Okay, so they don't actually disclose the technical details. So we'll look at the technical details. This isn't a very long technical report, but we'll skip over things that aren't too important. But yeah, I do hear quite a few Solidity projects are on Avalanche instead of mainnets or as well.
Yeah.
So let's, yeah, the flaw was discovered within the Avalanche C chain native asset call precompile, as we said. Cool. So let's look at this code. Oh, nice. This is a GitHub link. This is really nice. I don't know StateMine too well, but keen to check them out more. Okay, cool. So it's a function based on EVM, native asset call caller, common dot address, input, it's a byte array. Supplied gas is a UN64, gas cost is a UN64, and read only is a bool indicating whether or not read only or you can write. It returns a byte array, remaining gas, and an error if an error happened. Yeah, so it just checks if there's enough gas. Otherwise, it returns VM errors, error out of gas. That's pretty straightforward. If read only, I don't think the error would have been in there. If error not equal to null, okay, so they first, it equals, they assign, that's the same as the assembly, like assign. So they go unpack native asset call input, which is this input over here. And we get the 2, which is, the asset amount and the call data. And if error is not equal to null, an error. And if error is not equal to null, so there was an error, then they do just a generic execution reverted. Cool. So they just say this note is to do with overflow and underflow, that you can't put in a negative asset amount. Cool. So that's just the check to it makes sure that it's not equal to 0 and that it can transfer. So it checks the balance. Otherwise, return insufficient balance. They take a snapshot of the state of the database or the state of the virtual machine. Cool. They just check if it does exist with 2. Otherwise, they're out of gas. Oh, sorry. They first check if not. I'm struggling to understand this line, Flora. So it's not EVM state.dp it exists 2. Oh, so if there's no 2 address.
Like if the contract doesn't exist.
I see. So he's sending to a non-existent address. Then first it checks the gas is sufficient, minuses the gas before it does the call, and then it, which is I think a bit different to mainnet where it does it as a call. Yeah. And then it creates the account. So you're sending it to the address. So that's quite nice. I can say I want to send it to Bob, and then Bob gets the account. It creates an account for Bob. Increment the call depth. Cool. Then they have this func evm.depth decrement. Cool. Then they send asset amount of asset ID to the 2 address in this transfer multi-coin. And then if an error was returned by the EVM or when setting the creation code above, we revert to the snapshot which we created above and consume any remaining gas. But let's assume there was no error. Cool. And then they return the remaining gas and error.
I wonder what language is it?
I don't know what language you just read. That was very weird and difficult.
But it is quite fascinating, and it's
like I think
like it shows us that everything just code. Like even the EVM is just code.
Yes, even the EVM.
It is quite fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I assume this is like Avalanche's version of the EVM. We can actually find out what language you just read. I'd love to know because it's quite intuitive to read, but it has like assembly things and non-assembly things. It's not like any language I've seen.
Yeah, they have a GitHub link previously we saw.
Oh yes, that's quicker. What a good idea, Flora. Sorry, we're going on a tangent, but we're just curious. Wow, big code. Go.
Oh, it's Go. So it's
Okay.
the same as in Solidity.
Yeah, same as in Solidity. We just haven't gone that deep yet. It's the EVM. Cool. So this is familiar to us. This is Solidity. Cool. So this is just the access controller function. And then we have bar, make arbitrary call, require 2 not equal to foo, sorry. And then they do 2.call with passing in the call data. And there's a function called call foo, external. require that message sender is equal to the owner, and then also check that it's bar, which is the public address. And then here you can do some code. So that's very familiar Solidity with access control. Cool. So, okay, so the first target was Abracadabra's Cauldron V3, or the Kashi from Sushi. They have very similar flaws to the thing above. So the internal call method can make arbitrary calls to any address, but calls to bento box or this are restricted. So he has that function call. And then we see here, what do we see? I see, so, oh yeah, there's more. So require if the callee is not equal to address bento box or address this. So you can't call yourself. Cool, and then they make the call with passing value, and they require, which returns either success true or false, require success to be true, otherwise cauldron call failed. So we can prepare a call to native ACID call, which redirects a call to bento box or this with any payload. Don't mind that call is internal. Cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, there are no tons of different flash loans. Cool, so they have an ISO20 and then an interface I bento box with transfer and balance of functions. Then iCauldron with the function bento box returns address, function cook, and iNative interface iNative ACID call, and then here's the actual exploit contract. So we have an action call, which is a uint 8 constant 30. Native ACID call is an address 0x01 002, was it many zeros too? Address mem token and address owner. We set that in the constructor, and then we have a run function, which is external. Require the owner is the message sender. It takes in an address cauldron and an address receiver. We have a precompile of iNative ACID call, and we pass in native ACID call, which is this address. We've instantiates iCauldron and iBento box, so we're exploiting two different protocols. So we fetch the cauldron balance in bento box and pack bento box transfer call. So we go encode with selector, bento.transfer.selector with the mem token, the address of the cauldron, the receiver, and the amount. Then we pack bento box call to precompile call. So this is precompile call data in bytes in memory, ABI encode packed, and it's the address bento and uint256. So you're casting an address to a uint256. I'm not sure what this address is. It might be the address of bento box itself, but I'm not too sure. Flora, do you have an idea?
Yeah, maybe because it's like the exploit contract.
Yes, yeah. So maybe this is bento box.
Yeah.
Cost 0 to uint256 and the bento call data, which we had above. Oh, sorry. Trying to get this nice and even. Then we do, cool, now we get another action data. So ABI.encode, this is that address, precompile call data, bool use value 2, use value 1, both false, and uint, so 0 is our return values. Cool, then we have some uint array and a bytes array memories. Action value datas, these are just new arrays they instantiate. Action 0 is equal to action call, which we saw above. Value 0 is 0, and data 0 is action data. Then we call cook, which is a cauldron abracadabra specific function that I think we saw the interface of above, passing in actions, values, and datas. And then we have a require statement just to check it's working. The balance of bento mem token receiver is greater than 0, otherwise nothing transferred. So cool. So they had a fork. Okay, cool. So here's the lessons learned. I think that's great. So firstly, they say the reason why a lot of projects use precompile are quite clear. Basically, if you want to build an EVM chain and add some custom logic to it, for bridges, layer 2 connectors, or IBC, the precompile is the fastest way to do it. But you need to be very careful that you don't break the EVM invariants, even if they are not documented. If you break some invariant, so an invariant is like a statement that's assumed to be told true. It's like the core logic of something. And if you break some invariant that makes sense to smart contracts from other chains, it makes it incompatible with your chain. And be careful with stateful precompiles. If you have a stateful precompile, you need to check that it cannot be called using delegate call or call code, because by default, for stateless EVM precompiles, it doesn't matter how you call them because they ignore message sender. Yeah, and of course, if you still want to modify EVM, it's better to give your code for review to different independent parties who have expertise with a low level EVM. Yeah, so that's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, so they don't have message sender in Avalanche. Or they have it.
Yeah,
They
so basically,
ignore it.
yeah, delegate call and call code for stateless EVM precompiles ignore the message sender, whereas so if you have a stateful precompile and then you pass it into a stateless EVM precompile, it ignores things such as the message sender.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I think yeah, this is a very interesting one. This isn't as likely to come up in most viewers' day-to-days, I think. I mean, it's important to use care with other chains that aren't EVM, aren't the EVM itself, but yeah, you don't always use a precompile in your smart contracts usually, so it's a bit of a bespoke one, but it's very yeah, very, very interesting. So yeah, it's just saying here, the Avalanche layer 1 introduced a precompile that broke core security assumptions, those invariants. Yeah. Cool. I'm really excited to look at the read-only reentrancy, and maybe we start our next episode with that, because I think we're coming up on time. Rebecca, is that true?
Yeah, it is. It's
Okay,
5.
Awesome. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, and catch us next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Bye.
Bye.